Although the principles of fire remain the same, the environment we operate in is never the same. And because of that, sometimes we need to think outside the box. So I'd like to share with you a couple tips and tricks that I learned along the way to affect fire more easily. Tip number 1, set the stage. Now when I say set the stage, what I'm actually talking about is building a literal stage to start our fire on. Moisture and wetness can absolutely destroy a fire, so it's important for us to eliminate that as much as possible when creating our fire. To use this techniques, we have two different options. First, we can take some of our kindling and just lay it down in this fashion. By doing this, it protects our fire source from the ground and the moisture within the ground. Another option in super wet environments is to actually split a piece of wood. Once that wood is split, we can then lay it bark side down. By splitting the wood, it exposes the inner dry wood. This gives us a perfect platform or stage in order to start our fire in a dry condition. Tip number 2, scrape the rod. So there are actually techniques to using a ferrocerium rod. It's important that we understand these techniques because these techniques are going to deliver a much hotter, more consistent flame source to whatever we're trying to ignite. The first method that we use is called the push-pull method. This method is great to throw intense hot sparks into a general area. To utilize this method, we're going to grasp the ferrocerium rod with our non-dominant hand and our striker with our dominant hand. We then strike the rod by pulling the rod up and pushing the striker down. This effect is going to create a good hot intense spark coming off of the rod. The second method, we can then use the pump method. To do this method, we pin down our rod onto whatever our tinder source is, and we use our striker and forcefully push up and down on the rod, creating sparks in a specific area. Tip number 3, use it if you got it. Don't think of your ferrocerium rod as just a fire starting device. Also think of your ferrocerium rod as a tinder source. If we slowly and smoothly scrape our ferrocerium rod, it removes fine shavings from the ferro rod. Once we have a good group of shavings, we then want to strike our ferrocerium rod down into the shaving. This hotter, more intense flame source is a great addition to subpar material. So if you have damp or wet material, sometimes this extra little bit of boost is going to be just what you need to dry out that material and get it lit. Tip number 4, duct tape will fix it. Duct tape should be in everybody's kit. Not only is it a repair item if something breaks out in the field, you can also use it to start a fire. This is a really easy technique. All that we need to do for this technique is to take a strip of duct tape and process it down. We want to pull the tape apart into small strips. As we pull it apart, you'll see the inner fibers are exposed. The glue, which is an accelerant, and the fibers inside, which is the fuel, create a perfect setting for a fire. You can also then add one more step into this process. You can take your ferrocerium rod and scrape some shavings off into this pile of processed duct tape. Once everything is ready, you can then take your ferrocerium rod and scrape it into your processed duct tape. This will affect flame and give you a long burn time. Tip number 5, don't go all in. Although we want to get a fire every single time we try to, it's also important to conserve some of our resources. If we're lighting materials that can be lit with only one match, there's no reason to use more than one match. I know that sounds self-explanatory, but a lot of people go overboard with an ignition source. In this case, we have some birch bark. With a simple open flame, this birch bark will really quickly burn. There's no reason, on the other hand, to use a long burning strikeable tinder to get this ignited. We know that with an open flame it's going to ignite, so just use that. We're conserving those other resources for a later time. Tip number 6, light that candle. A candle is a great addition to any fire starting kit. Once lit, we have a long-lasting, long-burning flame. That candle can then be placed within the fire lay to help dry out damp material and ignite that into something more. This is going to save on us from striking our ferro rod numerous times or holding the switch on a lighter until we dry out the wood and actually light it. Once the fire is going, just pull the candle out and extinguish it, and we have ourselves a fire. So we very quickly only used an open flame source for a short time to light the candle, and then we used the candle for a short duration to dry out our material and ultimately light it. Tip number 7, practice. It's important that we practice in all different weather conditions. Hot, and dry, wet and cold. Every environment, every season is gonna offer new challenges in fire starting. So go out, experiment, and have a good time. Try things outside the box, things that you think might work, things that you think might not work. The more we practice and the more time we spend in the dirt, the better you're gonna become at fire making. So that's a few tips and tricks that I learned along the way. You can put them into use when you think you need them. Just remember, collect the proper materials. Keep the triangle of fire in mind, but most of all, have fun while you're in the outdoors. You practice and you think outside the box, fire starting is gonna come easy. This was Dan Wowak, UCO Ambassador. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as I like to say, stay in the woods.